just last year. Let's go live now to the AG's news conference. And I understand that we still don't have the press conference quite yet, so going to go ahead and bring in 9 Wants to Know investigative reporter Kevin Vaughn. Kevin, some obviously pretty damning conclusions here from this 118-page report. Yeah, they found that the Aurora Police Department engaged in racially discriminatory policing. They noted that Aurora's population is 16.5% of Aurora's population is black. They accounted for 40% of arrests, 46% of use of force cases. And so we're going to obviously find out about this now. We're going to go to the AG's news conference right now.
I announced the grand jury indictments in the Elijah McClain investigation. Today, I'm here to discuss a separate matter, the findings of a civil investigation of the Aurora Police and Fire Department. Last summer, we heard loudly and clearly the people of Colorado expect more from law enforcement. In Colorado, our legislature responded, passing a new law, Senate Bill 2217, which made significant changes to the oversight of law enforcement and instituted a number of measures designed to build confidence in law enforcement. As part of the overall effort to elevate the trust in and the effectiveness of law enforcement, that law authorized our department to conduct investigations and, if facts warranted, to require government agencies to change their behavior if there's a pattern or practice of violating the civil rights or denying the protections provided by federal or state constitution or law. This pattern or practice authority, as it's known, is a tool that the federal government has had for some time. But Colorado became a national leader by providing our department with the ability to engage in such investigations on a state level. Unlike an investigation of a particular incident, this law allows our department to look at an entire agency's course of conduct, evaluating whether or not there is a pattern or practice of violating rights secured by federal or state law. In the months following the passage of this law, the Aurora community made clear that it had concerns with regard to its police department and its fire rescue. Hearing those concerns, I put together a team to evaluate and to examine these agencies' conduct and determine whether or not there is indeed a pattern and practice of violating the law. To its great credit, the city of Aurora and the leaders of the Aurora Police Department and Aurora Fire Rescue cooperated fully with our investigation. They gave us complete access to those agencies. And I'm grateful to those leaders and those agencies for their professionalism, for their openness, and for their commitment to cooperate with this investigation. Our investigation included extensive data analysis and direct observation of Aurora Police and Fire Rescue, including over 220 hours of in-person ride-alongs with officers on patrol and firefighters on duty. We analyzed over 3 million records using very sophisticated analytical and statistical programs. We attended over 9 months of weekly force review board meetings where body cam footage was reviewed of officers who use force, and we observed how Aurora evaluates the conduct of its officers. We read almost 3,000 reports and associated documents from the past 5 years, all about the use of force by Aurora police officers. We conducted a detailed examination of Aurora's use of force and related policies that were all put in place after legislation enacted in 2020. We received comprehensive community feedback from dozens of leaders and residents and conducted dozens of interviews with Aurora police and fire rescue employees throughout the organization. This investigation concluded that the Aurora Police Department and Aurora Fire and Rescue have a pattern and practice of violating rights secured by state and federal law. Specifically, we found that Aurora Police has a pattern and practice of racially biased policing, using excessive force and failing to record required information when it interacts with the community. Moreover, we concluded that Aurora Fire has a pattern and practice of administering ketamine in violation of the law. Let me talk a little bit about each of these findings. First, our investigation found that Aurora Police has a pattern and practice of racially biased policing. With the help of a team of professional data analysts and experts producing graphs like the one you see here, we conducted a set of detailed analysis of internal Aurora Police data that reflects police activity since 2018. That data revealed statistically significant racial disparities, especially with regard to black people, in nearly every significant facet of police contact with the community. These disparities persisted along income, gender, and geographic boundaries. Together with the other information we reviewed, we concluded that Aurora Police engaged in racially biased policing, treating people of color and black individuals in particular differently from their white counterparts. Second, Aurora Police has a pattern and practice of using excessive force. We found that Aurora Police has repeatedly engaged in unlawful and unconstitutional uses of force, regularly applying greater force than reasonably warranted by the situation. We observed officers using force to take people to the ground without first giving them adequate time to respond to officer commands or generically reciting "stop resisting" when trying to control subjects, even though it appeared from other available evidence that the subject was not resisting. We observed officers immediately escalating situations and circumstances in which the subject was in obvious mental health distress, but did not present an imminent risk of harm to themselves or others. And we observed officers misusing the failure to comply with a lawful order under municipal charge to justify the use of force. These actions are unacceptable. They hurt the people that law enforcement is entrusted to protect, and they destroy community trust. In our review of the Force Review Board's meetings, we observed Aurora Police continuing to analyze force only under the requirements of the U.S. Constitution rather than under the new, more limiting requirements set out by Colorado law. In addition, our investigation found that Aurora Police has a misplaced understanding of de-escalation, focusing on requiring officers to calm down after the use of force, rather than avoiding unnecessary escalation in the first instance. Third, Aurora Police has a pattern and practice of failing to document stops of individuals as required by law. Colorado's law enforcement measure, Senate Bill 2217, requires that peace officers have a legal basis for making contact with a member of the public to enforce or investigate a violation of the law. This law also requires record keeping whenever such contacts are made. We found, however, that Aurora did not update its practices and policies to comply with this new law enforcement accountability law. And Aurora Police still make stops without documenting them as the law requires. This practice by Aurora allows a vast category of police activity, such as investigative stops, to evade scrutiny. Fourth, Aurora Fire has had a pattern and practice of using ketamine in violation of the law. Through a comprehensive review of Aurora Fire's ketamine and care reports, our investigators observed a consistent pattern of illegal ketamine administration. Aurora Fire relied on a ketamine review process that did not adequately ensure that paramedics followed the legal requirements for administering ketamine. Its review process failed to identify problems when ketamine was inappropriately administered or was administered at the request of police in violation of the law. After making these observations, we then sought to determine the underlying reasons as to why Aurora Police and Aurora Fire personnel violated the law. Most failures with Aurora Police relate to systemic and severe cultural challenges that are created by several factors. First, Aurora's police culture leads to a frequent use of force that is often in excess of what the law permits. Training in Aurora is ad hoc and does not address specific needs of the organization as shown by officer behavior. Aurora police policies are short on detail or practical guidance, often doing very little other than reciting legal requirements that are set forth in court cases and laws. In short, Aurora Police has not created the appropriate expectations for responsible behavior. Second, the Aurora City Charter gives the Civil Service Commission total control over entry-level hiring and the right to reverse all meaningful discipline that the chief of police can impose. The commission has demonstrated a pattern of overturning discipline in high-profile cases in a way that undermines the chief's authority. Officers who violate the law or policy are thus allowed to remain on the police force. The commission also has demonstrated a pattern of hiring recruits that do not reflect the diversity of the city. Third, Aurora Police does not meaningfully review officers' use of force, instead relying on formal and informal systems that presume policy compliance and deter candid feedback and discussion on how to improve or identify the improper use of force. To address these problems under the authority given to our office by Senate Bill 2217, we will compel Aurora Police and Fire Rescue to fix their organizations in several ways. Some of these changes directly relate to practices that violate the law. Other changes focus on culture, on leadership, and on structural reforms that address and will prevent the illegal conduct. We recommend and urge Aurora to enter into a consent decree with our department that will require specific and meaningful changes and ongoing independent oversight. We applaud Aurora's commitment to continue to cooperate with our office to try to implement such changes. If this effort is unsuccessful, however, we're prepared to seek a court-ordered solution to these problems. To enable Aurora Police and Fire to make necessary changes, we will, presuming continued cooperation, work with them on specific and tailored solutions that will reflect their input from experts, input from the community and our team to develop a meaningful consent decree. Under the pattern and practice law, we have 60 days to work with Aurora to reach an agreement to fix these problems. We plan on doing so and developing a consent decree that addresses the required changes in a way that has the best chance of making meaningful reforms and working for the city of Aurora. A court will be responsible for overseeing the implementation of this consent decree, and that effort will be aided and informed by a third-party monitor who will look closely at the changes being made. I want to close by thanking the extraordinary efforts and a great team that worked on this project over the last 14 months or so. This team included members of our department, external individuals and professionals who donated their time, and resulted in what, as you will see, is a very impressive report. This report we're issuing is interdisciplinary in the finest sense, bringing together professionals from different backgrounds, including law enforcement, prosecutors, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the United States Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, a former United States attorney who also worked as a trial attorney in the US DOJ's Civil Rights Division, and many more. To enable us to produce such a thorough and careful analysis, I'm grateful that a couple of national law firms generously donated their time, Bartlett Beck and Stoll Reeves. I'm grateful to former Chief of Police T. Bowman, economic consulting firm Compass Lexicon, and Dr. David Mordecai and Samantha Capagoda, all of whom put in over hundreds of hours in this investigation. I also appreciate my Solicitor General Eric Olson and Deputy Attorney General Janet Drake of our Criminal Justice Section, who led this effort remarkably effectively on top of their day jobs. This project, in short, exemplifies one of our department's core values, which is to be better together, bringing people together to work on important issues on behalf of the people of Colorado. I'm proud of how well this team worked together in a creative and collaborative fashion, both across our department and with outside experts. In closing, our objective is to develop an agreed upon consent decree that's going to enable Aurora to improve and build trust in law enforcement. That is what the community needs and deserves. Such a solution will hold Aurora accountable for past patterns and practices by appointing an independent monitor to oversee ongoing changes. It's critical that we take this opportunity to institute meaningful and lasting change. To that end, we're prepared to move forward with legal action, if necessary, to address these issues. We are thankful and grateful that the leadership of the City of Aurora, Aurora Police, and Fire Rescue have shown and have stated a commitment to seize this opportunity to improve and build community trust in law enforcement. I commend them for that approach and look forward to working with them to make the necessary changes. I would now welcome your questions. All right, start on this side and go across.
What kind of specific changes is your office seeking in order to accept a consent decree agreement outside of court?
When you read the report, you're going to see a number of specific failings of the type we talked about. For example, with regard to training or hiring. The changes we want will both directly relate to that, and in some cases will need to address underlying leadership, cultural issues to address those concerns. This is going to involve a back and forth, not just with the city, but with experts and with community members. We recognize the significance of this document, so we haven't done this by ourselves. The law calls for it to be a collaborative process, and that's the way we'll develop it.
What changes do you hope this will bring to Aurora Fire and the police department?
For us, the guiding light is how do we build trust in law enforcement and in government such that people are treated legally and fairly. The changes that we want to see both are changes in action and correlatively changes in confidence that the public can believe that their law enforcement is serving them appropriately. That's not going to happen overnight. We're going to develop a consent decree that will be implemented over time, but the end result is both changes in the practices of the police department and then ultimately the public having a higher degree of confidence in their law enforcement and fire agency. Yes.
Is there a possibility of a federal consent decree?
Our understanding as to how the Department of Justice operates is where there is a state action that is fully effective, the federal government puts its resources and energy elsewhere. Our commitment is to have a fully and effective consent decree such that there will be no need for federal action here.
Who exactly do you negotiate with in Aurora? Like, who's your team going to sit down with, and does City Council have to sign off on this?
I am not an expert in Aurora municipal government, so I probably need to encourage you to talk with them. I will say thus far, the city manager is the day-to-day chief operating officer or chief executive officer, and obviously the chiefs of police and fire have been thoroughly engaged. We'll continue engaging with them, and you'll have to talk to Aurora about what role the city council plays.
I wanted to ask you, over the last year, we've seen Aurora implement stuff that indicates they're trying to make a change. They hired 21 CP Solutions, which is a consultant for civil rights issues like this. They spent more than $350,000. Can you give your thoughts, or what would you say to the chief about those efforts, and did that impact at all your findings?
We analyzed the studies that you mentioned, and we also commend the police department for making some ongoing changes, some to comply with existing law, some based on their own recognition they have to do better. That is part of their direction that we want to continue to see move forward, and that continues to inform what the work ahead looks like. So we appreciate that, and there's more work to do. Let's go to the back and then.
I have two unrelated questions. One is, when, in the report, when you talk about you observing a use of force violations, excessive force, when you say that, are you talking about the ride-alongs? I mean, did your investigators actually see it, or are you talking about body cam footage that you viewed? Can you talk about how the data was?
There were a few different sets of observation points that informed the findings in the report. One were ride-alongs themselves. Two was body cam footage. Three would be discussions of use of force at force review boards. And fourth, there were actual records kept of whenever force was used, and you saw some of the statistical analysis of those records. This report, as you will see, has an impressive amount of both qualitative, some which is firsthand, some secondhand observations, as well as statistical analysis that underlies its conclusions.
Can you kind of explain the work of the independent monitor and the court? What exactly will they require from Aurora PD? Is it weekly check-ins or?
The exact rhythm and structure of the oversight is something we're going to have to figure out in the consent decree itself. There are other jurisdictions, think Los Angeles, that have had consent decrees because of pattern and practice investigations. We will seek to learn from what has worked well in those jurisdictions as we develop what is the first of its kind here in Colorado. This is the first of its kind under state law. Others will have to research, and we can try to get back to you, whether or not we've ever had another federal consent decree in Colorado of a law enforcement body. I don't know that offhand. So we will seek to learn from others as to how to best structure the independent monitor relationship. All right, you go back here.
Will there be any legal action towards individual officers found to violate the civil rights of its members? And if so, what will be that?
This report, these findings, and this process is systemic in nature. This is focused on the overall behavior with purely prospective injunctive relief that will change how Aurora operates. As a result, nothing in this process addresses individual actions by officers or provides potential actions that could yield other benefits.
You mentioned ketamine in the report. Did you look at the use of other sedatives by Aurora Fire?
Our focus was on ketamine. What we did is analyze that in particular. I'll note, I believe Aurora Fire has stopped using ketamine at all. Nonetheless, if they were to return, we do have some specific recommendations as to what the proper use of ketamine would look like. We didn't focus on other actions by Aurora Fire or other actions by its EMTs.
Do you think that either of these two departments needs new senior leadership? I know it's a situation where they really worked with you all diligently to come to a lot of these findings, but a lot of this happened underneath their jurisdiction at that time.
The leaders of both these agencies have been working very well with us. We'll continue to work with them, and we appreciate their commitment to reform.
How long do you think it will take to implement all of these changes that you're seeking in this report? You know, there are a lot of problems that you guys have unveiled. I wonder if you have any message to community members in Aurora who might be feeling uneasy. And then I'm also wondering if you guys have opened any other patterns and practices investigations into any other police departments or first responder agencies in Colorado.
All right, let me see if I can get all three of those questions. First, we don't have any other announced investigations that are underway. If individuals from the public want to report concerns that could give rise to future such investigations, our website has a way that people can report those concerns. We'll continue to analyze them. Second, our message to the city of Aurora, we need you engaged. I believe that our democracy is not a spectator sport, it's a team sport. The people of Aurora, when they read this report, will have an opportunity to share with us their ideas for a consent decree. This process will be collaborative, as I mentioned, not just with the city, but with the public, with other experts and interested community members. It is going to take time, years. We have to develop this consent decree, and then we have to implement it, and then we have to oversee it. If you look at other existing consent decrees, they often are in place for at least 5 years or more, and the work that has to happen has to remain vigilant and committed. And we need good police officers with a commitment to serve. We need good fire department officials with a commitment to serve, and we need to create the structures that support them. That's what the overall goal of this enterprise is.
I have two questions to follow up on that. How do you think this will impact the retention of officers and the crime rate in Aurora? They're struggling with both at this time. And then my second question is, if community members were to report to you, we've seen tons of body cam, and we've seen other questionable cases of ketamine across the state. What would rise to the level of you launching another patterns and practices at another department or other departments?
Second one I'll answer pretty quickly. It's a case-by-case determination. So there's no simple rule that I'm going to be able to articulate. If they're concerned, share them. We have to determine that there could be a pattern or practice of violation of civil rights, and we'll do that on a case-by-case basis. As for the people of law enforcement and the concerns about morale, the concerns about recruitment, and the concerns about how we effectively enforce our criminal laws, I believe that what we are doing today is hand in glove with elevating trust in and the effectiveness of law enforcement. What Aurora needs, we've heard loud and clear, is a law enforcement system that is worthy of their trust. And when you have a break in that trust, that hurts the community overall. And as a result, law enforcement is hurting in terms of their ability to do their jobs as well, and the community is hurting because they're not as confident. We believe this consent decree can elevate policing, elevate trust in law enforcement, and thus help actually make law enforcement more effective, thereby enabling us to reduce crime, to better recruit law enforcement, and to operate in a way that serves the community in a way that we believe police officers want to be able to do.
I have two questions related to the monitor. I believe city management had alluded to the implementation of a monitor earlier this year. Would this be in addition to that, or would this have to be vetted through your office? And secondly, however that shakes out, what court venue would this person be reporting to? Would it be state district?
We will have to figure out exactly where we will file a consent decree. We're first going to work on the consent decree, then we're going to figure that out. So we don't have yet an answer on where this will be filed. It will be overseen by a court. That is clear. We also have our own commitment to a monitor as part of the consent decree. Whether that interfaces somehow with a separate monitoring program, that's something we'll have to talk about with the City of Aurora. From our purposes, we need our own monitor to oversee the consent decree. It may or may not relate to other monitoring functions that could be set up.
Has the state ever issued a consent decree before, to your knowledge, and is this just allowed because of that Law 217 you talked about? And what message do you hope this sends to the City of Aurora?
The message we send to the City of Aurora is, we have heard you, that your concerns were worthy of investigation, were validated through an investigation, and are going to be addressed in a way that we believe will elevate law enforcement and will build trust in law enforcement, and that's going to take time, and we're committed to that work. To your point, this Senate Bill 2217 created this authority for the very first time here in the Department of Law. Before that law was passed, we did not have authority to conduct a pattern or practice investigation. This is the first such investigation we've conducted in the state of Colorado. It is one of the first such investigations we believe conducted by any state. Traditionally, this has been a federal capability. We now have it in Colorado, and we believe this effort shows that we can use it effectively. I don't know whether or not we've ever had a federal Department of Justice consent decree here in Colorado. We'll have to look into that question. But I can tell you this is our first state law civil rights investigation and consent decree done by my office.
So you said that there were multiple.
And you just heard from Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser, where he just said that the Aurora Police Department has, quote, a pattern and practice of racially biased policing and using excessive force. And he said that's largely due to severe cultural practices leading to that. So let's go ahead and bring in 9 Wants to Know investigative reporter Kevin Vaughn. Kevin, obviously a pretty damning report there. What are your top takeaways from what we just heard?
Well, I think the Attorney General hit extensively on this pattern and practice of racially biased policing. We're talking about an arrest rate much higher than for blacks than the number of blacks who live in the city of Aurora. Use of force cases, for example, blacks accounted for 46% of use of force cases They account for 16.5% of the city's population. And he talked about this pattern and practice playing out over a wide range of police activities, everything from stopping people, arrests, as we noted, use of force, almost every case where police officers interact with the public, they saw this pattern and practice. That was the most striking thing, I think, from the report. But it also goes extensively into the use of excessive force. It found, for example, that Aurora...
Our goal here in the Department of Law overall is to elevate policing, to elevate the work of those working in fire departments. We need you. We need responsible, trusted individuals in law enforcement. We need a system that helps you operate at your very best. In the Peace Officer Standards and Training Program, we're in the process of continuing to raise the effectiveness of training, as well as having effective transparency and certification that has accountability to it when people don't meet those standards. That is what Aurora is now going to be working very hard to do, to elevate their standards, to elevate their training, and to make sure when people don't meet it, there is some accountability so problems can be addressed. More broadly, we need our peace officers engaged with a continuous improvement mindset. How can we do better? The spirit of this consent decree has to be, we need to do better, we will do better.
I guess I just have one more question on, like, I know this is a different legal action, but many, many years ago, there have been legal agreements with Aurora in lawsuits that have happened, settlements in which there were agreements on making the police department more reflective of the community or doing things that would look out for civil rights violations and things like that. And clearly, based on your investigation, those things were never adhered to. And I'm just curious if you could explain why this, I mean, obviously you're the Attorney General, why is this going to be any different? Why do you think Aurora has this ability to change at this point?
We've seen from the City of Aurora's leadership, including City Manager, Head of the Police Department, Head of the Fire Department, a deep commitment to making reforms and lasting change. Second, we will have a legally enforceable consent decree overseen by our office with the aid of an independent monitor. And third, more broadly, there's a lot of work going on around this state around how do we elevate policing? How do we make our police force more diverse? How do we develop more effective and fair policing? That's a healthy conversation rooted in a spirit of continuous improvement. We're going to stick with that work and do our very best to make the necessary improvements.
Can you kind of just give a breakdown of what a consent decree is and what the legal purpose of it is?
A consent decree is a contract between two parties. In this case, it will be the City of Aurora and the Attorney General's office. It will specify requirements that the City of Aurora will have to follow in a range of topics relevant to what we talked about here. There will be monitoring, oversight, and other performance management measures. And it's going to be committed to lasting change that will include issues around culture, issues around how force is reviewed and how hiring is conducted. We see this as a unique opportunity. It's a moment in time when we're focused with Aurora, stepping back, how do we want to elevate, how do we want to improve? So it is a compelling opportunity. We intend to do our best to make the most of it. Yes?
You mentioned Los Angeles, but are there other places with existing state-based consent decree agreements that you guys will be looking at?
The Los Angeles one, I believe, is a federal consent decree. I don't know how many state-based consent decrees are in place. We'll look at those as well. The main model of this pattern and practice authority has been the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. That's been the main actor. And so we're going to look to and learn from them primarily, because with a history of different consent decrees, we'll be able to learn what worked better in one situation, what didn't work in another, and then build off that learning.
What is the enforcement mechanism of a consent decree? If they don't follow, they agree to do this thing, they don't do it, do they pay a fine? Like, what happens?
A judge overseeing consent decree has a number of tools. One is specific injunctive reliefs. We need you to do this. Or, as you note, if you were in contempt of court, you failed to do what a court requires you, you can be fined. We also have hear the political will and leadership stating we intend to follow the consent decree. And so in that sense, we believe the stars are in alignment. Our goal is to work together on developing an effective solution that can be implemented and make lasting changes. Any final questions?
How soon do you think you could reach an agreement with Aurora? And are you fairly confident they will reach an agreement with you? I know you said if not, you have other options, but.
Aurora has stated its commitment to reaching an agreement and to cooperating with us. As you know, if that fails to happen, we can go to court and we can seek a court-ordered consent decree. That is an option available to us under law. And we'll see how that all proceeds.
Sorry if you said this, but if you said you wanted 5 years, 7 years, 10 years?
We haven't specified the length. What I believe I said is, in general, if you look around at these consent decrees, they're at least 5 years, giving people just a sense of timing. And part of the discussion, negotiation will be how long is the consent decree in effect and what triggers could keep it in effect longer. That's another consequence if there's not sufficient compliance.
Any other questions?
All right. Thank you all for your time.